gathering in Portland, Oregon, and a special welcome to all the circus modelers who have come. First, we'll start by talking about a round end tent that would be found on your circus lot, whether it be the sideshow, menagerie, big top, or any of the other smaller tents usually found on a circus of the era where the tent shows were at their peak. Now, certainly there will be different ways to make your tents, and I'll be showing you the way I've made mine. It's a fairly simple method, but it does give nice results. And I'll not go overboard on a lot of detail, but just the basics to get you started. After you have the basics down, then you can elaborate and become more prototypical if that's the way you want to go. So let's get started then by taking a look at the materials that you will need to make the pattern for your round end circus tent. Okay, the basic materials that you're going to need to make your pattern are a good number 2 pencil, fine point black marker or ink pen, a protractor, scale ruler, and for your smaller tops, a compass. And then for tops that will, dimensions that will not fit the compass, what I call a yardstick ruler. This is just a wooden yardstick. I went to a graphics art store, told them I wanted to make a yardstick ruler, and you'll have to excuse me because I don't remember what these were called, but they fit a slot with the yardstick through the slot. One has a point, and the other holds a lead, and this will be used for making the arc on your pattern using the diameter of the width of the tent, and also white poster board on which to draw your pattern. Okay, now let's just move right on to our next step. Okay, now we're going to get started with the actual making of the pattern. I want to stress here that your pattern must be made to the actual size of your tent. Don't try and scale this down and then blow it up later on when you start your construction. Draw it to the actual size that your tent is going to be. Now on my poster board I've just drawn a horizontal line towards the bottom, and that will represent the ground. We'll be making 2 drawings to start with, but first I want to draw a side or end view of the tent as it is set up on the ground. So first of all, I'm going to find the point of the center pole on the tent. And the one I'm making today is a 110 round tent in HO scale. So with my HO scale rule, I'm going to measure off 55 feet, and that puts me right over here. That's one side of the tent. Moving over to the other side, out from that center pole line, I'll indicate the other side of the tent. Now, I want to have side poles that are 12 feet high. So again, with my scale ruler, well, maybe for better visibility, you know, HO gets kind of small and a little difficult to handle. Why don't we go ahead and make our sides 14 feet. So on my scale rule I've measured 14 feet. That's one side. Then just repeat the same on the other. Okay, now we need to determine the height of the canvas, the point at which it peaks. Not the dimension or length of the height of the center pole, but the height at which the canvas itself will peak on the center pole. Now one might debate as to how high for a 110 round your canvas would peak. Some of the older tents from the older period did peak rather high for their basic tent size. And I would have thought maybe 35 feet would be fine, but again, for better manageability and visual effect, I'm going to make my canvas peak at 38 feet. I don't believe this would be out of line for a 110 round. So at the point of my center pole, I will find 38 feet on my scale rule and draw it in. Now I'm going to measure off, or just mark off, just a line from the top of the peak of the canvas down to the top of the side pole. And I'll just draw that in like that. Okay, now it may not necessarily, just may not be necessary to draw both sides in, because this is the measurement that we need here. This is what we've established in the first part of our pattern. Now I'd like to move on, and we will draw a view of the tent as it would be seen lying on the ground or looking down at it from above, directly down. Okay, now we're going to draw the view of the tent as it would be set up on the ground, looking directly from above. Now, on my poster board again, I've indicated a center pole line and the sides of the tent. Now, my compass is not large enough to go from here all the way to the point here. Let me just darken those in a little better so you can see those. That's the center pole line. Okay. And again, as you can see, the compass isn't large enough. So I'm going to use the yardstick compass. So with the point piece here, I will adjust this to the side wall line. And this is what I'll use to make my arc. Now this lead might be a little light for you to see this real well. I'll try to get it on there enough, go over it several times so you can see that. Okay, it's a little faint, but it will give you the idea. Now, I need to divide this arc into as many equal sections as I can. For that, I think the simplest way is just to use a protractor. I'm going to line up this center point on the ground, and then using the various increments of measure on the protractor, I'm just going to go right around, just filling in dots in these various measured increments here, or degrees. Oops, I want to do that. And again, some of this might be a little light for you to be able to see, but we'll go over it enough times. Okay, here's a little closer view of what I just did. Here is our center pole line, and here are the measured points that I did with the protractor. Nice and even. Now, what I need to do is from that center pole line And using these as a guide, I need to draw a straight line out to through the sides of the tent. I'm just going to do this all the way around. And the reason for this will become clear a little later as we go along, and I'll be sure that you understand that before we complete the pattern making. Okay, and then just repeat this all the way around. Okay, now I've completed drawing all the radiating lines from the center pole point out to the diameter. If this should be done all in one piece, you're going to get puckers and pulls, which will not look good. So actually it's best to divide this end piece in half, which would be 9 spaces to make the half. Then you would make 4 half pieces to make your 2 round ends. And we'll go on to just a little bit more of that now before we go to the end. Okay, now I've gone ahead and divided that end piece in half, making 9 wedge-shaped pieces radiating from the center pole point, and just again drew in the reinforcement lines, this one at 18 feet, this at 36, just like the other. This is a seam allowance which you'll want to measure off on each side. Okay, so you have your seam allowances measured off on each side, and this is just an extra space. Leave plenty of room here, because when we go to do our rain curtain, to which you'll be putting your scallop trim, you want to have just plenty of room to work with, so I've left plenty of space here. Okay, now we'll go on to the middle part of the tent with the 3 40-foot middles. Okay, now I've gone ahead and drawn out the middle part of the tent with 3 40-foot middles. Now I'm making this tent so it will be open on one side, but I want a little bit of material coming down on that side. That helps just give stability to with your construction, and again later on I'll elaborate a little more on that. This is your ridge line. These are your center pole placement here. This is where your bail ring or your openings to accommodate the pole pin, if it's a push-pull top, will be. And just as I did on our round end pattern, I've put in the quarter reinforcements. The first one from the center out to the edge at 18, and your quarter pole line at 36. And also around the edge I've left a seam allowance space and across the top, and also the extra at the bottom for when we want to do our rain curtain and scallop trim. These measurements here again are just like the edges of the round end at 10 scale feet right along. Okay, just as an example, I'm going to hold up this end piece pattern next to this to give you an idea how it will look when you start going. Your lines match up to make the ends of the tent. Okay, now down at the side wall or the edge of the tent, we'll need to decide perhaps or depending on what period your show is. Way back in the mud show days, the placement of the side poles was right at the edge of the tent. There was no eave whatsoever. You might even notice that on some of the new tops, the vinyl ones that you see on the modern tent shows, that the side pole also is placed right at the edge. However, the tents that we usually see from photographs and from the earlier shows, the side pole was set back anywhere from 12 to 14 inches, creating an eave before you have the rain curtain which hung down. So if you decide that you want an eave on your tent, you're going to stitch another line just inside of the one I have drawn here at about 12 to 14 scale inches, like that. That will be actually where your side poles will insert through the edge of the tent, and the smaller area here will become the eave, and down from that will hang your rain curtain with the scallop trim. And you would just, if that's the way you want to go, you would just draw that line in all the way across and also around the outside edge of your round end pieces. Now this would be totally up to you, whichever way you want to go. Okay, we finished our patterns, and I've decided that along the outside edge that the poles will come right to the eave of the tent. I won't have that inset. So there's just a single line on my pattern. Now what you're seeing here, these lines, these are actually showing through my piece of material. I have a piece of material here down over my fabric. The fabric I'm using is the lightest weight unbleached muslin that I could get. I think it gives a lot better, more true canvas appearance than a bleached material. It has a few little imperfections, little spots, but that gives it a better and more natural look. And I have arranged my material over the pattern. There's a center line to the pattern running this way, and the nap of the fabric then is as much in line with that as can be. So it's a uniform pull all the way around. And when you start doing this, you can look at your material and you'll understand this, and I probably will explain it a little later. But let's go ahead and trace now the pattern onto the material. And again, you can see the lines of the pattern through the material. And I think the best thing to do, that I usually do, is just make a series of dots. This is at the point of our center pole line. And wherever lines intersect, out here this is our eave line. I'm going to go right around where our lines that radiate out from the center pole meet the eave line of the tent. And by doing this, then all I need to do is take my straight edge and go right around and connect the dots. These are marking where the quarter and reinforcement lines meet, and don't forget to have your material placed so you have enough room for your seam allowance all the way around. Now I've made these dots, so then all I need to do, as I said, is to take my straight edge and all the way around with a good sharp pencil is to connect the dots. And just keep doing this all the way around till you've drawn all your lines.
Now, why is it that you have to put the dots on there? Why can't you just draw them?
And I would just continue right on around drawing these lines. And then for the edge, you can see through there, I just go in and just by hand do those rather than going back and using my compass. Same for your quarter and reinforcement lines. And also don't forget to draw in your seam allowance lines. Because when you go to put your pieces together to sew them, that's real important. And then I just take scissors after that and cut along my seam allowance lines and cut the pieces out. I've already gone ahead and actually traced and cut out my pieces. Okay, this is what one of my end pieces looks like. As you can see, I've traced the lines on the piece, cutting it out on my seam lines, and then that extra allowance here. This is plenty of allowance, but I go ahead and draw it in and cut it out just so I'm always sure that I have enough, because this is where we'll be finishing the edge of the tent. And then I also have the middle section of the tent. It's gotten a little wrinkled right there at the bottom, but I'll be pressing that out a little bit before I actually start stitching. As you can see, again, I just made the dots, tracing it through on my pattern, again just connecting all the dots. This is our center or ridge line. This is our center pole locations here, here, and here. And this is that extra little bit that will come out on the open side. Now if you wanted to make your tent closed, or have it so you can have it closed or roll it back for viewing, you would make the pattern on both sides the same as this. This would just extend on up this way to give you one full middle piece. But I just want mine cut out for viewing, so I'm just making that little extra on the open side. Okay, the next thing then is to pin our pattern pieces together and to start our sewing. Okay, before I pin my individual pieces together, I'm going to go ahead and sew my radiating or vertical lines first. This just makes it a lot easier rather than pinning together first and sewing the sections and then trying to do this. And we won't be stitching on these outside edge lines because those are going to be seams where you're joining together with the mating piece. So we'll just skip this first one and just do all the inside lines first. And I start at the outside edge of the tent, just using a straight stitch, not too long but yet not too short. And I think if you practice a little bit first on a little scrap of material, you'll come up with the right setting for whatever your machine might be. And also I start where the needle will come down first, right at the line at the edge of the tent. I allow the machine to advance 2 or 3 stitches, and then I reverse quickly a stitch or so and then go on and proceed ahead, and that locks that in. If you've never used a sewing machine before, it might be easier if you can have someone do this for you who is proficient at the sewing machine, or like I say, practice a little bit on some scrap material, and it really isn't that difficult. So I'm going to go ahead and start my stitching now, just using a straight stitch to simulate the roping. There, a little reverse, and just stitch right on up to that merging point. Just let it run there. And just for the sake of time, I trim these thread ends off after I've gone all the way around. I just like to get the stitching done. Now I've gone ahead and done my other 3 end pieces and the middle piece, and it's done just the same way, just stitching these radiating vertical lines. Down right to the edge of the line, the outside edge. A few stitches, give it a reverse, and away you go again. After a bit, this may seem a little tedious, but actually it will go a lot faster than you think. This is actually the inside of the tent where we have our lines drawn on, our pencil lines. That's the inside of the tent. Oh, and also I'm using a thread which matches my material as close as I can get. You might want to pick a thread that has a little bit of contrast. Certainly wouldn't choose anything lighter, but you might get something that's a little deeper color than your material, just for a little contrast. Now, some people like to use bright colored thread, which is red or blue or multicolored thread. Now this is fine, I'm sure, in some instances, but for the more prototypical tent, I would avoid that and stick with something that matches your material or offers just a shade or so darker in contrast, because you're simulating the roping in the tent, and of course you wouldn't have seen actual tents with completely different colored lines running along the roping. But again, this is strictly up to you. I have seen some done that way, and they really are eye-catching. And I think that's why a lot of people choose to do that. They want to get some visual appeal there, and that's fine. It's just a matter of individual preference or taste on that point. See, I've got just this last one to do here, and this really hasn't taken long at all. Okay, now I've got the stitching done. What I'm going to do is just go around with the scissors and just snip these thread ends off. Whoops. Just do that all the way around. And on the other side. Some people have even sewn with 2 different colors at a time by putting another color of thread in their bobbin, or having a different color, which might make an interesting appearance also. Okay, so there's the piece now that I have stitched, this will be the outside of the tent. This was the inside where we had our lines drawn. And as we go along, I'm going to show you how to make a nice red trim line along your quarter reinforcement there. Okay, and just real quickly, this is my middle piece, and as I said, I'd gone ahead and done the stitching, the vertical stitching on that, same as on my end pieces, and it's all ready to go. Now on the center ridge line, I've right in the middle I did a zigzag. This is about a 1/8 inch length zigzag. It just adds a little contrast and gives the notion that this is where the ridge is laced together. You don't need to do that, but you can if that's what you want. Okay. Here's what I was saying about the zigzag here. Okay, here's what I've done. We've sewn the two lines. This is on your pattern. And here is the zigzag in between, which is simulating or giving the impression of the sections laced together. Okay, just real quickly, I want to show you how I placed my pattern pieces on my material. This was the piece of material I purchased, and so I laid the pieces out so that the midline of my round end pieces all laid the same way on the material, both the middle pieces and the end pieces. And I did that so I wouldn't get any cross pull. If I would have placed them with the midline of the pieces running this way or something off center, I would have gotten pucker and pull while I was sewing and when I set my tent up. So make sure that you lay your pieces running the same way, whether they be this way or this way. It doesn't matter, just as long as the pieces are laid with the same direction. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and pin my pieces together and take to the next step of putting the tent into all one piece. Okay, I've pinned two pieces together here, mating them right along my seam allowance lines, and I've pinned them so that at the edge where the quarter reinforcement line comes, and I can run it through on the other side and it matches at the same point, just to make sure things are in line. And place your pieces right sides together. That means that when it's pinned together, you're going to see your line drawn pattern in each side. So when it's stitched together, you'll have your outside that way. Again, these are just basic sewing principles here. Now I'm just going to go ahead and with a straight stitch, same as we did before, I'm going to go right down this first seam. I don't need to worry about doing the reverse here. I'm going to start well enough back so that it'll be fine when it's all sewn together, and you'll see as we go along how this all works. Okay, now let's go ahead and start our stitching down this first seam. Start well enough out to the edge and the outside, coming right up this first seam. Make sure you keep your material nice and straight here and come right up all the way through. Okay, I've pressed out my other two end pieces and pinned them together the same as before, and I'm going to sew those two pieces together the same as I did the first two. Just making sure I keep it straight here. Okay, this is the first two that I did, and I just went and with the iron I pressed out this center seam here out flat. We're going to leave that alone just for a while now, and I will be showing you how to finish that. So I'm going to go ahead and press this seam out in my second one, and then we'll sew our two end sections now onto our middle piece. Okay, now I've pinned the end pieces here to my middle piece, lining up the quarter lines again from this middle with this end pieces, same as I did with the end pieces. Make sure right sides are together, and I can check again here by running a pin through the quarter line at the seam line here, and it comes out and matches up on the other side with the, I don't know if you can see that. That comes right to my quarter line reinforcement. Just a little test just to make sure things are lined up. I'm bringing this top point of my end piece right up and matching with the middle of the middle pieces, right where the center pole goes there. Okay, and I'm going to just sew right up this seam line again, the same as I did on the others, making sure everything's laid out nice and straight. Just your straight stitch again. I'm just going to follow right up that line. You have to make sure when you get to the very middle of your end pieces, right where it comes to the bail ring opening, you need to stop. Don't go clear through that piece. Give it a little reverse. Okay, this is the outside edge of the tent here where I started sewing, and I sewed right up the seam line here, and when I got right to this point right here in the middle, that's where I stopped. You don't want to go sewing right through because you're going to sew into the other part of your middle, and you'll see that as I finish this. But just go right to the middle, give it a little reverse to lock it in, pull it out, and cut the threads off there. Okay, I just went and turned this over and pressed out the seam inside as I did the others. I just wanted to show you where this is placed so that the center where all these converge meet right in the middle of your end piece. Now later on we'll be putting in this little semicircle stitching that's in here, and we'll be placing our bail ring and sewing that in later, but that's how that should look when you're all done with this step that I just finished. So now I'm going to go ahead and sew the other end section onto the other end of the middle section, just as I did this one. Okay, here's our middle part of the tent here, and where I've pressed these seams out here on our end piece and where the end piece is joined to the center. And then this is that continuation of our middle piece that will come over. And what I've done is along this line here, this is that little allowance, I've pressed that down, and I'm going to be stitching all the way along this, clear to the other side, before I will then mate it up with the side of this other end here. I want to do this first, sew this down, and I've just pressed it over ahead of time. Okay, now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and stitch that down, and I'll be right back. Okay, now I've gone ahead and stitched down that little flap that was across this front opening part here, all the way along. Now I'm going to want to mate that up and join it to our end piece, and I'll line it up with the seam allowance on the other side, just as I did when I'm putting the ends together before. I'll pin that. Okay. So I'm just going to pin this here. Now here's my seam line. You can see it drawn on there. I'm going to go through and make sure that lays on the seam line on the other side. Then I'm just going to go ahead and pin these together. Now so far you may not think this looks much like our tent, but we're just about to where you're going to be able to see it real well. So when this is turned over, we'll start to have our completed end. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and stitch that down. Okay, now I've finished stitching this little extension of our front end here. Sewing it to here, and then along the edge of our end piece, I pressed that over and stitched it down there. So then this is what we have here. As this has been turned over, and this is the opening here. Now I'd like to get a long shot to kind of show you what this tent looks like so far. Okay, this is what we have ended up with so far. Our end, our middle, and our other end. You can see this kind of flares out here like that. Well, when you put your tent up on the center poles, our calculated measurements makes this come out nice and square. And this is our open end. Okay, now I'll show you how that we will put our horizontal lines in. Our eave line and our quarter reinforcement lines. Okay, first of all, before I sew in the eave and the quarter lines, remember I had pressed back our seams on the inside. I need to cut those down before I sew in the quarter lines and all. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick them up like this, turn them and cut them within about 1/8 of an inch of my stitching there. So I'll just have a real small seam. Let me go ahead and do that now, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm through. Okay, I wanted to show you that I just went and turned the seam with the seam to one side and trimmed it down as close as I could to the actual seam, and then pressed it out again so it's a little smaller. Now what I've done before then as a treatment for this is on the right side of the tent I have stitched over my seam right down the middle of my seam line here with a close narrower zigzag. And again, just to give the look or the feel of the sections laced together. And what that does then is it stitches this seam inside down flat. So when we put our trim in there, we'll have a nice flat bit of material to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on all my section seams. And again, for the zigzag, you want to test first on a little piece of scrap material till you get something you think looks right. You don't want it too wide or too long. Keep your seam centered in your sewing machine foot so that that's catching both sides of the material that zigzag is. That's coming along nicely. I'm going to take it right up to that middle. I'm just going to go right around and do that on all of my seams, lacing the sections together. Okay, I'm on my last seam now. This is the seam joining two end pieces. Okay, let me just snip this off here. And now you can maybe see what it is I've done here. If I can get this laid out smooth enough. Okay, this is the zigzag that I've done right over the seam. This is on the outside of the tent. And that's where the sections have been laced together by our fast working and eager canvas crew. And on the inside, it has helped to flatten down our seam that we had. This will be laid over with a color reinforcement trim like you see inside your big tops. Okay, now I want to go ahead and put in our reinforcement lines. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right here at an edge, run it through the machine, and I'll just be following it clear around the entire tent. I'll do that on both the quarter and the reinforcement and on our eave line, which is the outside edge of our tent. So I'm just going to start first with the reinforcement line closest to our center pole area. And this is a little tricky sometimes to turn this material as you go, so you don't want to go too fast. You just kind of have to keep working your material so that you can stitch right around, making that arc. Be as accurate as you can. Sometimes it may play a little bit over the line or something, but it really won't be too noticeable. But try and keep it as accurate as you can. Through the middle sections now, just a nice straight line. Coming into the end again, and I start working the material around as I go, slowing it down a bit so I can keep some accuracy here. Sometimes, since you've drawn your pattern, traced it onto the material, your pencil lines might get a little faint. You might want to check those lines before you finish this, and maybe go back and pencil them in again enough so that you can see them well. These were a little light. They'd kind of gotten rubbed off, but I was still able to see them. Okay, now that's the first reinforcement line. Now this is our quarter pole line. I'm going to do exactly the same thing, starting at one end. This one's easier to do since it's a larger arc. It's not as much of a struggle to make the turn. It's just that I have more material hanging down now, so I'm working to keep that turning. If I had a regular sewing table, I wouldn't need to do that, but I'm just working on a little bench here. Coming through the middle sections again. Believe me, once you've made one of these tents like this, they get easier every time, and every step you do will nearly be automatic. You won't even think about it much. You'll just know what to do and just move right along and do it. And this will work for any scale you might be in, whether it's HO, quarter, 3/4, ½ inch, 1 inch, or whatever. Just the larger the scale, the more detail you'll want to put in. And now finally, for this last bit of sewing here today, I'm going to do the outside edge, the eave line of the tent. Give that a little reverse to lock it in. So far, well, I've made tents in HO and 1/4 inch. I've made a 1/2 inch round end dining top, and to date the largest tent I've made though was for circus model builder Larry Baggett of Salem, and that's in a 1½ inch scale. The sections on his big top actually laced together just like the real thing. And the roping was stitched right to the material, and that gets really involved. I guess that's one advantage of smaller scales, is you don't have to be that detailed. But all the basic planning for that tent, even that large, was still just the same as this. The same principle of our pattern, still exactly the same. And once you learn how to make that pattern, and I believe that made it fairly simple and clear, you should have no trouble following it. Once you learn how to make a pattern, you can make any tent you want. Other edge, give it a little reverse lock. And now here we have our You see that our quarter lines sewn on here. They go all the way around the tent. Okay, I'm going to just trim my loose threads off of this. And we're going to do one thing next that I want to share with you about a product I think you'll find very helpful in your tent making. Okay, for finishing the outside edge of the tent, I like to use this product called Fray Check. And you can get it, it's a, however you pronounce that, Dritz product at any of your fabric or sewing notion store. And it's a clear liquid, and I just go along and apply it along the outside edge, just about make sure that a 1/4 inch from my eave stitching, that I get it out there on there at least, so a 1/4 inch is covered. Then when that's dry, I cut away this excess here that I had told you about, so I have a nice clean edge on which to glue the rickrack, which will become our scallop trim. And this prevents your material from fraying. It's very nice to use in a lot of areas of tent making. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and when we come back, I'll have that cut out and show you how to glue on your scallop trim. Okay, I've gone ahead and cut out the excess edge of the tent and applied the rickrack. As you can see, I applied the fray check so that I could cut this nice and clean, just under a 1/4 inch from my edge stitching here, and applied the rickrack, just gluing it on. I use some Aleene's tacky glue. I like that because it's stiff enough that allows you to put the rickrack on and work your way around, holding it in place, and then later on you can come back and adjust it. Now I'm going to turn this over and show you the rickrack on the other side, which is the inside of the tent. And this is how it looks here. All I did was just glue this down. And I like to do it so that, I'll turn it over again, so that just the little bump edge shows on the outside. And I just did this all the way around the tent, completely all the way around. And that's really pretty self-explanatory. So next we'll go on and I'll show you how to do the inside trim of the tent. Okay, now to do the inside trim of the tent, I went to my local fabric store and bought a roll of material called Heat and Bond. There's another similar product referred to as Wonder Under, and I used to use that, but I don't feel it does as good a job as Heat and Bond. It comes in rolls like this, or rolls of various widths, almost like tape or ribbon. But I like to go ahead and buy the roll, and then I can cut the pieces as I need them to whatever size I might be working with at the time. It's paper on one side, and on the other side is kind of a rough, clear bonding material. And all you do is iron that on the fabric you're going to be working with the bonding side down, ironing on the paper side to apply the bonding material to your fabric. And now I'll show you how I do that. Okay, what I've done now is I've laid the piece of Heat and Bond that I've cut out with the webbing side down onto the fabric, paper side up, and with just a medium iron, medium to hot, just press it over several times so it stays down on the material. Don't overdo it, you'll ruin your bonding material. And that'll set that on there. Leave that alone just for a moment to completely cool before you proceed any further. Okay, this is cooled sufficiently, and what I want to do is to cut the reinforcement line striping that runs along the inside of the tent. Now this is cooled, I'm just going to lay my metal straight edge along, and using a single edge razor blade and the rule as a guide here, I'm just going to start at one end, and I've got this on a board, so I'm not going to cut through and hurt anything. I'm going to make just a cut down like that, but I'm not going to go clear to the end, and I'll explain why in a moment. And then I'm not going to measure this off and mark it. I'm just going to eyeball it to just about 1/8 of an inch, move the rule down, and I'm going to cut again. And just doing that, you'll want enough so you can go clear around the inside of the tent on your reinforcing line. Still eyeballing careful to keep it about 1/4 of an inch. Just keep doing this. You might need about 5 or, go ahead and cut out 6. These are about 10 inches or so. And then for your section reinforcements that run from the side wall up to the center pole, where the mated pieces of tent come together, you might want to cut them a little wider than that, just under 1/4 of an inch. And we have 1, 2, 4, we have 6 of those that we'll need to cut, and just go ahead and cut those the same on down. And then I'll show you now what I have after doing this. As I have, then I'll cut, for instance, let me show you this real quick. Okay, at this one end I'm just going to cut through, and so I end up like this with these loose. Now I'm going to leave these at the end like this, so when I go to separate the paper bonding, it will be easier to get a hold of like this and just peel that right off. Now I have my strip pieces with the bonding on the other side. You can see that shiny, it leaves it on there, ready to press onto the material of the tent inside. Okay, now I'm ready to iron the reinforcement striping along our 1/4 pole line. So I'm going to take one of these strips that I've cut that has the bonding on the one side. You can see how shiny that makes that. That's your bonding side. That goes down. I'm just going to lay it right so it's over the middle of my reinforcement line stitching. And then just with the tip of my hot iron, I'm going to start it just by pressing that down a little bit. That sets that. Then if I just go around carefully and follow along with the iron, I'll be able to lay this right around on the 1/4 pole line. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. It goes pretty fast. Following along, and actually your material will curve real nice. And then I'm going to stop at that section line there and snip that, because I'm going to put some reinforcement up that side. Taking another piece and leaving just that little gap there, so when I put the section reinforcement it won't get too bulky at that point. Just going to do the same thing. And cutting that there. And now on the middle sections, I'll do the same thing. And I've already done half of this tent here. I'll just continue that on through this other section And then I'll cut out circles. These are where our quarter pole placements are. You'll want to determine before you start ironing these down where your quarter poles are going to be. We'll have 2 quarter poles in each middle section and 6 on the ends, 3 in each sections, fairly uniformly spaced. Okay, I've gone ahead and done that rest of that middle. And then the piece that I've cut that's a little wider, that's going to go up our canvas section seam line. And I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to start from the ridge and just go down like that. I'm going to trim off the excess up here. If you feel like you've made a bobble, run your iron back over that again real lightly. That'll soften the bonding, and you can pick up your material. Wait for it to cool a little bit and then bond it back down. And that'll work nicely for you. Just continuing right on around. Cutting out the other piece. Doing the same thing. Starting at the ridge line or center pole line again, working my way right down to the outside edge of the tent. Snip my excess. Okay, and the last one here, our end piece. Now at this point I might just want to say that if you want, you can put this also along your ridge line inside the tent. However, this part will not show when your tent is set up for display. But if you want, you can do that, and that's just cutting another wide piece to go right along your ridge line, and you can put circles there as your center pole reinforcements. And then for the quarter pole reinforcements, again, which I had just a scrap of my bonding on some material, and I just roughly drew some circles approximately dime size, and I just cut those out. You'll find too that after your material has set a while that the paper will want to come away from the material. And if it does that and it's difficult for you to cut these out, then just run your iron lightly over it again. Make it a little easier to cut out. And just cut out the number of circles that you need for the number of quarter poles you have. We're doing 2 in each middle section. Put your bonding side, shiny side down, and just press your iron over for that for just a moment, and press it down like that. And again, I've gone ahead and done the end here, as you can see. Now, in the HO scale tents, I wouldn't advise bothering to use the little tiny metal grommets that are available. They're actually too big to scale, and they can be a real headache to put in. This tent is going to be made to set up and remain set up, and our material will serve as a reinforcement. So I wouldn't bother with grommets at this time. Also, if you like, you might want to put small red circles at your side pole locations. I'm not going to do this. I think it just takes too much time, but you can do that if you want, and it'll look real nice either way. Okay, now I'm back, and I want to just give you a brief demonstration of how I have done the roping along the edge of the tent. HO scale being so small, you want to come up with roping that is going to be within your scale and still at the same time be strong, give you the strength that you need. And I have found that button and carpet thread, it's a cotton wrapped polyester thread, and this basically is what it looks like. You can get it at any fabric store that has a good selection of threads, and I find that it works real well. Now I'll try and show you this. It's really quite simple, and just using a needle large enough to accommodate the thread through the eye of the needle, pulling it through just enough to give you some end to work with. And I just start from the inside of the tent where the roping comes down to the stitching at the outside edge of the tent. And right where those two meet, I'm going to insert the needle and bring it back through so it's actually going around the other side of that eave stitching. So then when I tie this off, what I'll be doing is tying a knot around that eave stitching. And I just lost my thread here. And we'll try that again. And just pull that tight. Now you've made a little knot. Then what I do is I go back again and I go out the same hole where I first went in, pull it on through to the outside, so then I have the stitching coming off the edge of the tent. And it's really fairly simple. And then just trim your ends inside here, and then just go ahead and leave this plenty long for now until you're ready to set up. Also, another thing I've done is I just made some simple jump rings out of some wire that I had here. You can make your own. I'm sure most of you know how to do that. Or you can purchase them from your craft store in the jewelry making section. And just gone and stitched around this, knotting the thread, starting from the underside, coming up through where there's a small hole that I have carefully cut where the bail ring opening is, and just going around and just loop stitching this on. And that gives you reinforcement and also gives the appearance of a bail ring. And I did go ahead and put a ridge in my tent. And as we said, that's something you can do if you want. You don't have to. It really doesn't show. Unless you're like me, sometimes you like to get down with a camera, your video camera or whatever, and look up through the side of the tent inside. It's just kind of a fun thing to do, and that does add a little more realism there. Okay, and then your roping, you just do that all the way around. Another thing I do is at my seams, or where the sections of the tent come together, I put a double roping at each section where the tent sections meet. Okay, this ends our tent construction video. I hope that it's been of help to you. And after you've made these tents a few times, it really does get easy. You won't even think about it. You'll just be able to dive right in and make just about any tent you want. Later on, maybe I can do something to show you how to make hip roof and gable end tents. There's something about making your own tents and seeing them go up on your lot that can give you a great amount of satisfaction. It's a lot of fun, and after all, that's what circus model building is about, is having fun. This time also I'd like to thank several people who have helped me and been an inspiration to me since I began Circus Days and Cotton Candy Dreams.